This is Mr. Oscar, and today we will talk about something that I suspect you have experienced so regularly that you have stopped questioning it and started accepting it as simply the way you are built. You have time left in the day, often significant amounts of it, hours that were supposed to be productive, hours you planned around, hours that existed on the calendar as execution time and arrived reliably, predictably as something else entirely. Not time for rest exactly, not genuine leisure, just a kind of flat, depleted, motivationally empty state in which the work that needed doing sits exactly where it was this morning while you sit across from it, present, available, technically capable, and completely unable to close the distance between yourself and it. The time did not run out. You did. And the most frustrating part, the part that has probably generated more self-criticism than almost anything else in your relationship with your own productivity, is that you cannot fully explain why. You slept. You ate. You did not, by any obvious measure, expend the kind of physical energy that should produce this level of depletion by 2 in the afternoon. And yet here you are, again, with hours remaining and nothing left to give them. Today, I want to give you the precise explanation for what is actually happening. Not the motivational version, not the lifestyle version, but the specific neurological and psychological mechanism that the research has documented with extraordinary clarity. Because once you understand what is actually depleting you, and it is almost certainly not what you think, the solution stops being a matter of trying harder and becomes a matter of designing differently. I want to describe a period in my rebuilding years that I look back on with a specific kind of frustration. I had structured my days carefully, early mornings, a clear plan, a prioritized task list that was genuinely well constructed, the important work at the top, the administrative work at the bottom. I was doing, by every external measure, the right things in the right order, and I was still hitting a wall somewhere between 1 and 2 in the afternoon that I could not push through with any amount of coffee, commitment, or self-criticism. By mid-afternoon, the quality of my thinking had dropped noticeably. Decisions that should have been straightforward felt heavy and complicated. Writing that had flowed in the morning had become effortful and slow. The creative problem-solving that my most important work required had simply gone. What remained was a kind of going-through-the-motions execution that produced output I would quietly revise the next morning with the fresh recognition that it was not good enough. I told myself I was not sleeping well enough. I told myself I needed better nutrition. I told myself I was doing too much and needed to cut back. None of those things were wrong exactly, but none of them were the real explanation. The real explanation came from a direction I had not been looking. Not the quantity of work I was doing, but the specific nature of the decisions, transitions, and emotional management I was performing in the hours before the wall arrived. And when I found the research that explained it, I felt the specific relief that comes from finally having the right diagnosis for a problem you have been treating incorrectly for years. The first and most foundational piece of research here comes from Dr. Roy Baumeister at Florida State University, whose landmark work on what he called ego depletion I have referenced before on this channel, but whose findings apply to today's conversation with a specific precision I want to go deeper on than I have previously. Baumeister's research established through a series of now famous experiments that self-regulation, the capacity to manage your behavior, your emotions, your impulses, and your attention in accordance with your intentions rather than your immediate inclinations, draws from a finite cognitive and neurological resource. And that resource depletes with use throughout the day. But here is the specific finding that most discussions of Baumeister's work miss entirely. The depletion is not proportional to the difficulty of the work. It is proportional to the number and nature of self-regulatory acts performed, regardless of how significant or insignificant those acts appear. Every decision depletes the resource. Every moment of resisting an impulse depletes it. Every emotional management act, staying calm in a frustrating conversation, maintaining patience with a slow process, suppressing the irritation of an interruption, depletes it. Every transition between tasks depletes it. Every moment of choosing to continue with difficult work rather than switching to easier work depletes it. And all of this depletion occurs before you have necessarily done anything that looks like significant work. The meetings in which you managed your reactions, the emails in which you carefully chose your words, the morning interruptions you handled without visible frustration, the small decisions that accumulated through the first 4 hours of the day without any single one appearing costly. By the time the afternoon arrives and the most important work is supposed to happen, the resource that focused, high-quality execution draws from is already significantly depleted. Not from the execution, from everything that happened before the execution was supposed to begin. You did not run out of time. You ran out of the neurological resource that makes time usable for the work that matters most. The second body of research that explains this comes from Dr. Shai Danziger at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, whose study of judicial decision-making produced one of the most striking demonstrations of decision fatigue ever documented in real-world professional performance. Danziger and his colleagues analyzed over 1,000 parole board decisions made by experienced judges across a single working day. The finding was unambiguous and disturbing. The probability of a favorable parole ruling, a decision requiring genuine cognitive engagement and the weighing of complex factors, dropped from approximately 65% at the beginning of the day to nearly 0% by the end of a decision-making session. After a food break, the probability reset to 65% and began declining again. The judges were not becoming less competent across the day, they were becoming more cognitively depleted. And as depletion increased, their decision-making defaulted toward the cognitively cheapest available response, in the case of parole decisions, denial, rather than the most considered one. What Danziger's research demonstrates for your execution problem is this: the complex, nuanced, creatively demanding work that constitutes your most important daily execution is precisely the work that requires the most from the cognitive resource that decision fatigue is depleting. And you are spending that resource in decisions large and small, in emotional management, in the constant self-regulatory demand of a modern professional day, long before you reach the work that needs it most. The third mechanism is one that the research is only recently beginning to document with the clarity it deserves, and it comes from the work of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University, the neuroscientist whose research on how the brain constructs emotion and manages what she calls the body budget produced a framework that reframes the energy depletion problem completely. Barrett's research showed that the brain is continuously, below the level of conscious awareness, managing a predictive body budget, an ongoing forecast of the body's energy resources, their current level, and the predicted demands on them, and that this predictive budgeting process is itself energetically costly. Every uncertainty the brain is tracking, every unresolved problem it is monitoring, every open loop, the unfinished conversation, the unmade decision, the task that was started and not completed, represents an active line item in the body budget that the brain is continuously tracking and managing. In plain language, the mental overhead of everything unresolved in your professional and personal life is consuming energy continuously and largely invisibly, not in dramatic moments of anxiety or worry, in the quiet, persistent background processing that the brain performs around everything it has registered as incomplete, uncertain, or unresolved. This is why the person who carries significant unresolved mental overhead, multiple open projects, ongoing interpersonal tensions, unmade decisions that keep representing themselves, often feels depleted early in the day before they have done any work that should justify the depletion. The body budget has been running expensive background processes all morning. The execution energy was being spent before the execution began. David Allen, the productivity researcher and author of Getting Things Done, identified this same phenomenon from a practical rather than neuroscientific angle when he described what he called open loops as the primary source of mental energy drain in knowledge workers. His research-informed framework showed that capturing every open loop into a trusted external system, removing it from the brain's active monitoring, produced significant and immediate restoration of cognitive energy that participants had not realized was being consumed. Barrett's neuroscience explains precisely why Allen's practical observation is correct. The brain stops budgeting energy for monitoring what it trusts an external system to track. The open loop is closed at the neurological level even before the underlying task is completed. Here is the practical framework. 3 structural interventions, each one addressing a specific layer of the energy depletion mechanism. The first intervention addresses Baumeister's ego depletion finding directly, and it requires a single, consequential restructuring of when your most important execution happens relative to the self-regulatory demands of your day. The most cognitively demanding, most creatively requiring, most execution-dependent work of your day must happen first. Before the meetings, before the email, before the decisions and the emotional management and the social navigation that will deplete the resource those tasks depend on. Not because mornings are inherently magical, because the resource is fullest before it has been drawn on. Baumeister's research is unambiguous. The quality of self-regulatory performance is highest at the beginning of the resource cycle and lowest at the end. Structure the day. So the work that needs the most of that resource gets it when it is most available. This means protecting the first 90 minutes to 2 hours of the working day, whatever time your working day begins, as a non-negotiable execution block. No meetings scheduled within it, no email open before it, no decisions made inside it that are not directly related to the execution task itself. The second intervention addresses both Danziger's decision fatigue finding and Barrett's body budget research simultaneously. It is what I call a nightly resolution practice, a 10-minute end-of-day process that closes the open loops Barrett's research identifies as the primary source of invisible energy drain. Before you finish work each day, write 3 things: every open decision that is currently consuming background processing energy, and the specific criteria that will determine when and how it gets made. You are not making the decision tonight. You are telling your brain exactly when and how it will be made, so the background monitoring can stop. Every open task that is currently unresolved, and the specific next action that will move it forward. Not the complete plan, the one next action. Allen's research shows that the brain's monitoring of an incomplete task is resolved not by completing the task, but by clarifying the next physical action. The loop closes when the brain has a concrete next step, not when the work is done. And every unresolved interpersonal or emotional situation that is generating background processing, and one specific action you will take tomorrow to move it toward resolution. 10 minutes. Every evening. The body budget is cleared of its most expensive background processes, and the morning begins with a cognitive resource that has genuinely recovered rather than one that has been silently running all night. The third intervention addresses the cumulative decision load that Baumeister's research identifies as the primary mechanism of midday depletion, and it draws from a principle that Barack Obama, Steve Jobs, and numerous other high-output individuals have applied, not as a lifestyle quirk, but as a deliberate cognitive resource management strategy. Eliminate or automate every decision that does not require your highest cognitive function, not the important decisions. The recurring, low-stakes, repeated decisions that consume the same resource as important decisions without producing proportional value. What to eat, what to wear, what time to exercise, what the standard agenda of your recurring meetings will be, what your default response to common email categories is. Each of these decisions, individually trivial, draws from the same finite pool that your most important execution draws from. Automating them through pre-decided defaults, routines, and standard responses does not make you less thoughtful. It makes the cognitive resource available for the thinking that actually requires it. Baumeister's research is specific. The resource does not distinguish between a trivial decision and a consequential one. It depletes at approximately the same rate regardless. The executive who makes 50 small decisions before noon arrives at the critical strategic decision of the afternoon with the same depleted resource as someone who made none. Design the day to eliminate the 50 small decisions, and the critical decision gets a full resource rather than a fractional one. I want to close with something that reframed the entire way I understand personal output capacity. For years, I measured my productivity by the hours I spent working. If I was at my desk from 8 until 6, I had worked a full day. If I produced less than I had planned despite those hours, the explanation I reached for was always about effort, focus, or discipline. What the research gives you, Baumeister, Danziger, Barrett, Allen, is a completely different framework, one in which the hours are almost irrelevant and the management of a specific finite neurological resource is everything. You do not have unlimited execution energy that you are failing to access through insufficient discipline. You have a finite, depleting, recoverable resource that the structure of your day is either protecting or squandering before the most important work has had a chance to use it. The problem was never time. It was never willpower. It was the architecture of the day, the sequence of demands, decisions, and open loops that arrived before the execution and consumed what the execution needed. Redesign the architecture, protect the resource, execute first. The energy you thought you didn't have has been there all along. It was just being spent in the hours before you asked it to show up. I'm Mr. Oscar. This is Execution Psychology, and I will see you in the next one.